My name is Nora Whitfield. I am 63 years old, a retired librarian, and a widow who has spent most of her life raising my son and caring for my family. Books once surrounded me, and I used to believe stories were only found in them. But life, I learned, writes its own chapters with ink you cannot erase. 2 days ago, I decided to bake a cake for my grandson, Ethan's 6th birthday. Not just any cake. This was the same vanilla sponge with raspberry filling I used to make for my son David when he was little. Back then, the smell of sugar and butter meant safety, meant home. I wanted Ethan to taste that love, to feel in his small hands a piece of history, our history. So I stood for hours in my tiny kitchen, kneading, beating eggs, waiting by the oven as if guarding a treasure. My wrists ached, my back throbbed, but my heart was steady. I imagined Ethan's face lighting up when he saw it. I whispered to myself, "This will be my gift, not from a store, but from me, his grandmother, his blood." By the second night, when the frosting was finally smooth and the raspberries glistened like jewels, I carefully boxed it in a white carton tied with a blue ribbon. I had not felt so proud in years. That morning, I walked across town carrying the box as though it were glass. My fingers pressed against the cardboard, my chest rising with hope. When I reached my son's house, balloons swayed on the porch and laughter spilled from the backyard. My pulse quickened. I climbed the front steps and knocked. The door opened. Melissa, my daughter-in-law, stood there. Her eyes dropped to the box in my hands, then back to my face. She did not smile. She did not invite me in. Instead, she said it. 14 words that sliced me deeper than any blade ever could. "We already ordered a real one." Her voice was cold, final. She tilted her chin toward the backyard where I could hear Ethan's laughter. My knees weakened. Before I could breathe, before I could explain, she shut the door. The wooden slam echoed in my chest. I stood there on the porch, still holding the cake I had poured my soul into. My hands trembled. The blue ribbon fluttered as though mocking me. On the other side of the door, children squealed, "Happy birthday," and a chorus sang along. I could almost picture Ethan clapping his little hands around a cake covered in store-bought frosting, candles glowing, and I was not there. I whispered to myself, my voice breaking, "If a cake made with love is not real, then was the life I gave, the years I sacrificed, ever real to them?" The wind pressed against my face. I felt smaller than I had in years, invisible, as though time itself had erased me from the picture. My son's voice carried faintly from the backyard, warm and joyful. But not for me, not with me. I turned slowly, clutching the cake. My shoes felt heavy on the wooden steps. My chest ached with every breath, and I thought of the years spent sewing costumes for school plays, cooking late dinners, reading bedtime stories to a boy who once called me his whole world. Now, I was just someone standing outside a closed door. Yet deep inside, a whisper stirred. This was not the end of my story. This wound, raw and searing, would not be the final chapter. I did not know it then, but something unforgettable was waiting just beyond this pain, a turn I could never have foreseen. Because sometimes, what breaks you most deeply is the very thing that opens the door to who you were meant to become. If you have ever stood outside a closed door, holding on to something you poured your heart into, then stay with me. This is not just about a cake. It is about dignity, love, and the quiet power of rising when the world tries to erase you. What happened after that door closed changed everything. I stood there, frozen on the porch, my fingers trembling against the cardboard box. The laughter from the backyard was muffled now, like a dream I could not enter. My hand lifted halfway to knock again, but it faltered in the air. I let it hover inches from the wooden door before retreating. The hesitation felt heavier than the cake itself. My chest tightened. Should I plead, beg Melissa to let me in? Should I lower myself just this once more for the sake of seeing my grandson blow out his candles? Or should I walk away, carrying with me the bitter knowledge that my love had been shut out? The wood beneath my palm felt warm from the afternoon sun. I pressed my hand there, as though if I left it long enough, the door would remember me. Then slowly, almost ritualistically, I pulled it back. That simple act, placing my hand, then withdrawing it, was my first step towards silence as strength. I would not beg to be acknowledged. I turned, walked down the steps, and held the cake close to my chest. The ribbon had come slightly loose, dangling against my arm, a frail thread between what I offered and what was rejected. Each step away from the door rang like an echo in my bones. I did not cry. Not yet. The tears were locked somewhere deeper, waiting. By the time I reached my small house, dusk had crept across the sky. I set the box on my kitchen table. The golden light from the ceiling lamp fell over it, and for a moment, it looked like a shrine. The cake sat inside, untouched, its smooth frosting still perfect. It was love, captured in flour and sugar, yet unloved. My house was quiet, too quiet. I lowered myself into the wooden chair beside the table. My fingers traced the edge of the box. So this is what it feels like, I whispered to the empty room, to give everything and be told it isn't real. The silence answered back. It was not cruel, but it was absolute. After a while, I reached for the old tin box on the counter. The lid squeaked as I opened it. Inside, wrapped in brittle parchment, lay my recipe notebook. The pages had yellowed, their corners curled like autumn leaves. My handwriting slanted across the paper, ink smudges, small notes, childish stars drawn by David when he was 8 years old. I flipped through slowly. Chocolate cloud for David, 8 years old. The words blurred for a moment, and I had to blink to clear them. I remembered that day. He had stood on a chair beside me, sprinkling cocoa powder into the bowl, his small hand shaking. He laughed when he spilled some on the counter, and I told him mistakes were just part of baking. When the cake cooled, he hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would break. He said, "Mom, this is better than magic." Better than magic. I mouthed the words to myself, my throat closing. Now, decades later, I was the same woman, sitting under the same yellow light, with another cake, this time for his son. And still, I was on the outside looking in. The kitchen clock ticked steadily. Each sound reminded me that time had passed, is passing, will keep passing, whether I am invited to the table or not. My eyes fell again on the box, on the blue ribbon that had begun to fray. Love, packaged and dismissed. I thought of knocking once more, driving back, insisting. But the image of Melissa's face, her cool eyes, her voice laced with disdain, froze me in place. I whispered into the quiet, "No." I will not ask twice to be seen. There was strength in that refusal. Small, quiet, almost invisible, but strength all the same. I ran my hand across the notebook again, tracing the recipes, the memories, the fragments of my life captured in sugar and flour. This book held proof that my love had once mattered, that it was once cherished. Every line written was a conversation, a prayer, a gift. And yet here I was in a kitchen that smelled faintly of vanilla and raspberry, alone. The silence grew thick. I placed both hands on the table, grounding myself, and stared at the cake. It was not just dessert. It was a mirror of my love, delicate, vulnerable, rejected. My chest rose and fell slowly. I whispered again, this time not to anyone outside, but to myself. If they cannot see it, I must learn to. That night I did not sleep. I sat in the dim light, the cake still resting before me. And in the stillness, I began to understand silence was no longer defeat. It was the seed of something else, something waiting to rise. The morning after the party I was not allowed to attend, I sat at the kitchen table with the untouched cake still resting there. I had thought perhaps I would cut myself a slice, but I couldn't bring myself to break it. To do so would feel like admitting that its purpose had truly died on the porch last night. It was then that a soft knock came at my door. I opened it to find Rachel, my young neighbor, balancing her toddler on her hip. The little girl's curls bounced as she clutched a stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitfield," Rachel said, her voice gentle, carrying that unpolished kindness only some people have. Then her eyes shifted beyond me, landing on the cake, box still on my table. Her expression changed, first surprise, then delight. "Oh my goodness, that cake. It's gorgeous. Where did you order it from?" Her words startled me. I blinked at her, a strange mixture of shame and pride washing over me. Slowly, I stepped aside, letting her glimpse it more fully. The frosting was still smooth, the delicate piping intact. The sugar roses stood upright like sentinels guarding a memory. "I didn't order it," I said, my voice lower than I intended. "I made it." For a moment, Rachel just stared at me. Then her eyes lit up. "You made that? With your own hands?" I nodded. My fingers twisted together nervously. In my family, that cake had been dismissed as something less than real. But here, in Rachel's wide-eyed admiration, I felt seen in a way I had not for years. She stepped closer, her toddler leaning forward to peer curiously. "It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. You could have charged hundreds for a cake like that. Honestly, Mrs. Whitfield, it looks like something straight out of a bakery magazine." Her words tugged at something inside me. I wanted to deflect, to shrug, but I couldn't. Instead, I whispered, "I made it for my grandson." But I wasn't. I wasn't allowed to give it to him. Rachel's face softened and her free hand reached to rest on my arm. "I'm so sorry. Families can be complicated. But please don't let that moment define this cake. Or you." Her toddler squealed suddenly, pointing at the sugar roses. "Flower cake, Mommy! I want flower cake!" Rachel laughed, then looked at me with an almost pleading expression. Would you consider making something like this for my daughter's birthday? She turns 4 next month and we can't afford one of those fancy bakery cakes. But seeing what you've created, I'd pay you, of course. I'd be honored." Her words hit me harder than I expected. My throat tightened, and for a moment I couldn't speak. It wasn't about the money. It was about someone, an outsider no less, recognizing the value of my hands, my love, my time. I swallowed. "You'd really want me to? Want you to?" "I'd be thrilled," Rachel said, her eyes glistening as if she could sense how much it meant to me. "My daughter deserves a cake made with love, not something mass-produced, and you clearly put your whole heart into this." Something inside me stirred. Just last night I had stood at a closed door, my offering rejected. Now, in the quiet morning light, another door seemed to open, a door I hadn't expected. I looked at the cake again. It no longer seemed like a symbol of rejection. In Rachel's words, it became proof that what I created had meaning, if only the right eyes saw it. I finally smiled, small but real. "All right, I'd be happy to make her a cake. Tell me what she likes." Rachel's relief was immediate, her face glowing. "She loves pink, anything with pink flowers, and maybe butterflies." Her daughter clapped her hands, repeating, "Butterflies. Pink butterflies." I laughed softly, a sound that felt foreign after so much silence. "Butterflies it is." When they left, I stood by the door for a long while. My heart felt lighter, though the ache was still there. Rachel's request was not just about a cake, it was about being seen, being valued. Where my own blood had closed the door, a neighbor had opened one. It struck me then. Sometimes the validation we crave does not come from where we expect. Sometimes it comes quietly, from someone holding a child and speaking with honesty. And in that reflection, I began to see myself differently. That evening, when the street outside had grown quiet and the hum of lawnmowers faded into the distance, I heard another knock at my door. My stomach tightened. I half expected more silence or rejection. But when I opened it, I found my son David standing there with Ethan at his side. David's eyes were tired, a little guilty perhaps, as he held a paper bag. "We brought back the party favors," he said flatly. He placed the bag on the counter without meeting my eyes. "Melissa thought you might want one." Before I could respond, Ethan's gaze drifted to the cake still sitting on the table. His small face lit up, his eyes wide with wonder. He tugged at David's sleeve, but when his father didn't notice, he slipped past him and walked right to the cake box. "Grandma," he whispered, almost reverently, "is that the cake you made for me?" I nodded, afraid my voice would break. Ethan's fingers hovered above the frosting roses as though he was afraid to ruin them. His voice trembled with excitement. "It's so pretty. But Grandma, can I taste it? Please?" The cake at the party was nice to look at, but... He paused, wrinkling his nose. "It didn't taste like yours. I want your cake." The world seemed to stop in that moment. My heart clenched, and suddenly my throat burned with a mixture of sorrow and joy. I looked at David, who finally raised his eyes to mine. He said nothing, just gave a slight nod as though granting permission. With hands that trembled slightly, I reached for the knife. The frosting gave way beneath the blade, releasing the familiar scent of chocolate I had known for decades. I cut a generous slice and placed it on a small plate, sliding it toward Ethan. He didn't wait. He picked up his fork and took a bite so big it nearly toppled the piece. His eyes fluttered shut, and when he opened them again, they were shining. "This is the best, Grandma. Better than anything." His grin was pure, unguarded joy, and in it, I saw a reflection of another boy many years ago. Suddenly, memory flooded back. David, at 8 years old, perched at this very table, giggling through a mouthful of cake crumbs. "More chocolate cloud, Mom! This is the best thing ever!" His laughter had rung through the house, careless and bright. I had written those words, "chocolate cloud for David, 8 years old," inside my recipe notebook, a small act of love preserved in ink. I turned now to that same notebook still resting on the counter. Its pages were yellowed, corners worn, but the handwriting was clear. My finger brushed over the faded line. Chocolate cloud, David, 8th. Now Ethan, 8th. 3 generations tied together by cocoa and flour, by a recipe that had lived longer than some relationships. "Grandma, can I have another piece?" Ethan asked eagerly, crumbs still clinging to his cheeks. I laughed softly, shaking my head in wonder. "Of course, sweetheart, as much as you want." David cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "He's right, Mom. Your cakes, they're always better. I should have..." He trailed off, words unfinished, guilt heavy in his silence. I didn't press him. I didn't need apologies forced out of him like reluctant confessions. The moment was enough. My grandson had chosen my cake. He had chosen me. As I served Ethan a second slice, I realized this cake was no longer just an offering rejected on a porch. It had become something more, an anchor, a bridge spanning years of love and silence, a reminder that the labor of my hands was not forgotten. Ethan looked up between bites, grinning with chocolate smudged on his lips. "Grandma, can you teach me how to make this one day? I want to learn. Maybe we can write it in the book together." My chest swelled with pride, the kind that rises slow but steady until it fills every part of you. I placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Yes, Ethan. One day, we'll write it together, and you'll add your own page." The recipe notebook sat open beside us, its ink a testament to the past. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't see it as a relic. I saw it as a living record, one that could still grow, still carry new names, new joys, new celebrations. That night, with Ethan's laughter filling my quiet kitchen and David watching silently from across the room, I felt a shift inside me, a small, steady reclaiming. My cake had found its place, my love had been tasted and remembered, and in Ethan's eyes it was real. As Ethan savored his second slice, his laughter filling the kitchen with a brightness I had almost forgotten, my eyes wandered back to the recipe notebook left open on the counter. Its yellowed pages seemed to whisper, not only with flour dust and cocoa stains, but with memories that could never be erased. And in that moment, I felt myself slipping back in time. I remembered the night the world fell apart. David was only 7, still so small, when my husband collapsed on the back porch after a long day's work. One moment he was humming a tune, the next he was gone. The hospital lights, the sterile smell, the words "massive heart attack" still echo in my bones. I had held David's trembling hand that night, promising him through my own tears that somehow we would be all right. But when the casseroles from neighbors stopped arriving and the phone calls dwindled, silence settled over our little house like a heavy quilt. I would tuck David in, only to sit at the kitchen table afterward with my grief pressing down so hard I could hardly breathe. It was then, in one of those long nights, that I had opened this very notebook and tried to bake something, anything, to bring a little sweetness into our bitter days. The first cake I managed was crooked, lopsided, the frosting sliding off one side. But when I placed a slice before David, his little face lit up. "It's so good, Mama," he had said with crumbs sticking to his lips. For the first time in weeks, he laughed. That laugh saved me. It reminded me that life could still hold small joys, even if it would never again be what it once was. From then on, baking became more than a hobby. It became survival. It became my prayer, my therapy, my way of keeping us afloat. With every whisk and stir, I told myself we were going to be okay. With every chocolate cloud and vanilla dream, I tried to stitch together a broken childhood for my boy. As Ethan now licked frosting from his fork, the parallel was undeniable. His eyes were the same shade as David's had been at that age, full of wonder and trust. My chest ached with both tenderness and sorrow. Perhaps David had forgotten those long nights, the way cake had been our balm, our glue, our silent companion. But I had not. I whispered inside my own mind, words I could never quite say aloud. "You may not remember, David, but the sweetness once saved us both. It carried us when grief tried to drown us." Across the table, David shifted in his chair. His eyes had fallen on the open notebook, and I saw something pass across his face. A shadow, perhaps recognition. For a moment, I thought he might speak, that he might acknowledge the nights when sugar and cocoa had been our refuge. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He lowered his gaze, hiding whatever emotion had surfaced. That silence cut sharper than any rejection. But I did not push him. After all, memory is not always kind. Sometimes it is easier to forget than to face how much you were loved, how much someone gave up for you. Still, I could feel the weight of that silence pressing between us, heavy yet also oddly familiar. It was the same silence I had known when I worked double shifts, when I stayed up through the night, when I held his head against my chest after nightmares. Silence had been my companion as much as sugar had. Ethan, oblivious to the tension, reached for the notebook with frosting-stained fingers. "Grandma, is this where the magic comes from?" he asked, flipping a page and giggling at the smudges. I laughed softly, even as my throat burned. "Yes, sweetheart. That's the book that holds all our secrets." He grinned, but I noticed David's eyes flicker again toward the words, "Chocolate cloud for David, 8 years old." His face softened just for a heartbeat, a crack in the armor he had worn for so long, but then it vanished. He stood, clearing his throat, and muttered something about needing to get Ethan home. I nodded, watching him avoid my gaze as he ushered his son toward the door. When the door closed behind them, I sank into my chair, the quiet settling around me once more. Yet it was not quite the same as before. This time, I held the sound of Ethan's laughter close, layered over the echo of David's from years ago. Two voices decades apart, tied together by sugar, flour, and love. Perhaps David had forgotten, but I never would, and maybe, just maybe, one day he would remember. By the end of that week, the quiet in my kitchen had changed its tone. It no longer sounded like abandonment. It sounded like beginning. Rachel told two mothers from the playground about my cake, then mentioned it to the music teacher. Requests began to arrive like notes slipped under a door. The first was simple. "Could you make a small strawberry cake for our Bible study on Tuesday?" I said yes, then stayed up late whisking jam into buttercream until the color looked like sunrise. The ladies passed plates down the table, and when the plates came back to my end, they were empty. Someone patted my shoulder and murmured, "Not just delicious, it has soul." Another request followed. A retiree named Mrs. Connolly wanted a sheet cake for her farewell party at the library where I once worked. She pressed a crisp envelope into my palm. "For the best librarian we ever had," she whispered, "and for the baker she was hiding." When I carried the cake through those familiar doors, the smell of paper and dust wrapped around me. Soon the elementary school called for 24 cupcakes, pink for the first grade and blue for the second. I lined them on cooling racks, then piped small flowers while the radio murmured songs. My wrists ached, yet my hands moved with steadiness I had not felt in years. Work that once felt like survival now felt like breath. Word reached the church choir. The pastor's wife arrived with a list, apologizing for its length. "Birthdays this month, a potluck next Sunday, and a casserole train for the Jensens. If you can't, we understand." I smiled and wrote everything down. "If you let me set the price," I said gently, "I promise to set it kindly." She laughed through grateful tears. "That is already more kindness than we are used to." At the counter, I kept my notebook open. I wrote quantities and times, but I also recorded names and stories. Who loved lemon, who was allergic to walnuts, whose granddaughter had just moved in after a hard divorce. Flour dust settled over the ink. Each batch felt less like commerce and more like letters I was learning to send. Children became my favorite customers. Rachel's little girl came to sprinkle sugar pearls and miscount on purpose so I would have to taste one. A Sunday school boy handed me his allowance, 3 crumpled dollars for a cookie shaped like a treble clef. Ethan called one evening to ask if I could bring a chocolate cupcake to his baseball game because Grandma's frosting makes the ball go faster. I wrote it all in the margins, proof that a life can be measured in small sweetnesses. The compliment surprised me most. A teacher said, "It tastes like home." An usher at church declared, "Not just delicious, it has soul." A shy neighbor murmured, "My mother used to bake like this. I thought that flavor was gone." I learned to receive praise without shrinking. I answered with thank you, not apology, with a smile, not a warning that it was nothing. Rachel kept teasing me to put up a sign. "Grandma Nora's kitchen," she said, sketching flourishes in the air. I resisted the idea of anything grand. I had been invisible so long that being seen felt dangerous. Still, when she brought over a small slate and a stick of chalk, I wrote the words in tidy letters and leaned it on my windowsill. People tapped the glass as they walked by, then waved. Money came in quietly. I paid the water bill without dread for the first time in months. I slipped a tithe into the church basket, then delivered a pan of brownies to the food pantry because generosity had once saved us, and I wanted to send it forward. I felt useful again. Not loud, not celebrated, simply useful. Late one afternoon, as a new batch cooled, I opened the window to let the vanilla drift out to the sidewalk. Feet slowed, voices softened. I wiped my hands on a towel and looked at the notebook, at the page where I had underlined one sentence. Keep the humility, keep the craft. My hands were alive, quick, certain, reverent, but my heart stayed low to the ground. That was when the phone rang about a small neighborhood wedding in need of a simple lemon meringue. I said yes, wrote the name on a fresh page, and circled the date. I did not know it yet, but at that wedding a stranger with silver hair would lift a fork, pause, and change everything. The wedding was held in the community hall at the edge of town. String lights hung from the beams, and laughter spilled across the floor like champagne. I had baked 2 lemon meringue pies for the reception. Simple, nothing fussy, just golden peaks that reminded me of clouds at sunset. I placed them on the long buffet table beside trays of cold cuts and paper cups of punch, then stepped back into the corner as I always did. My place was never at the center. I had grown accustomed to watching joy from the margins. The bride's uncle was the first to slice into the pie. He closed his eyes with the first bite, then nudged another man to try it. Soon plates began to clatter as people reached past the potato salad, asking where the pies had come from. I kept silent, smiling politely when someone said, "Whoever made this should open a bakery." That was when I noticed a tall man with silver hair wearing a navy suit with a tie loosened at the collar. He held his fork like a conductor's baton, moving slowly, deliberately. Each bite of lemon meringue he took was measured, as if he were studying it. His eyes narrowed, then widened with something like recognition. I did not know who he was, but I felt his gaze sweep the room until it rested squarely on me. After the music slowed, he approached. His voice was low, steady, almost conspiratorial. "You made those pies." It was not a question. I nodded, my hands clasped together so tightly my knuckles whitened. Yes, just something simple for the bride's family. He set his empty plate on the counter, leaned forward slightly, and said words that shook me to my bones. "You know, America is starving for this, for honesty, for food that tastes like it remembers something." I blinked at him, unsure how to answer. He extended his hand. "Thomas Green, food critic. I write for regional magazines, sometimes the Times. I travel across states tasting everything from lobster rolls to barbecue pits. But this..." He tapped his fork gently against the empty plate. "This is different. It's humble, but it carries weight. It's truth." Heat rose in my cheeks. I looked down, embarrassed. "It's just lemon and sugar, nothing fancy." He shook his head, his silver hair catching the glow of the lights. "It's not the ingredients, it's the soul you folded into it. You cannot fake that. People have forgotten how to taste sincerity. You, Mrs. Whitfield, have not." For a moment, the music and chatter around us blurred into a hum. I thought of the years in my kitchen, the silent mornings after my husband died, the nights I baked to keep David from hearing my sobs. Could he taste that history? Could a stranger feel all that? Thomas seemed to sense my thoughts. He lowered his voice, almost like a confession. "You should not be hiding in a church kitchen. You should have a place with your name on it. Even the smallest bakery, a sign that says, 'Grandma Nora's Kitchen.' People would come. I would write about it. Do you hear me? You have something this country aches for." My breath caught. The idea sounded impossible, almost laughable. Me, a woman past 60 who had spent decades invisible, opening a bakery. I pressed my palms together, trying to steady myself. "I don't know," I whispered. "It's been so long since I dared to believe I could build anything." Thomas studied me, not with pity, but with conviction. "You don't have to build an empire. Just start with one door, one table. Let the smell of your cakes do the rest. Sometimes a single oven can change a neighborhood." His words lingered like a hymn. I wanted to say yes, to feel bold and alive, but fear tugged at me. Fear of failing. Fear of my family's scorn. Fear that I was nothing more than an old woman with trembling hands and a box of recipes scribbled on yellowing paper. Yet, under the fear, a spark flickered. A picture formed in my mind. Children pressing their noses against a glass display, neighbors gathering at a counter, Ethan tugging my apron asking for an extra slice. Could it be possible? Thomas placed a card on the counter. "Call me when you're ready. I'll help however I can. And I promise, Mrs. Whitfield, when people taste your baking, they will remember what it means to be cared for." He walked away, leaving me clutching the card as though it were both a lifeline and a weight. My heart pounded with a mixture of terror and wonder. I glanced back at the buffet table where the last crumbs of my pies had vanished. For the first time in years, I felt the door of possibility creak open, just wide enough to let the light in. And yet, I could not know then that stepping through that door would not only lift me up, but also stir the shadows of envy in my own family. Shadows that would soon try to take everything from me. I did not know at first what storms were gathering inside my own family, while my hands kneaded dough and my kitchen filled with the sweet scent of sugar and butter. David and Melissa were drowning in silence behind closed doors. Their boutique business, once so full of promise, had collapsed under debts and unpaid invoices. Creditors called day and night. The polished image Melissa showed to neighbors had begun to crack, though she tried to glue it together with expensive clothes and brittle smiles. One evening, as I cooled a tray of cinnamon rolls on the counter, a friend slipped a folded newspaper into my hands. There it was, an article Thomas Green had written, my name in bold letters. Grandma Nora's kitchen brings authentic warmth back to American baking. I stared at it, stunned. I had not asked for attention, but there it was, my pies and cakes described with reverence I hardly recognized. What I did not see was Melissa, at her kitchen table, reading the same article. The lamplight struck her eyes with something sharp. She circled phrases with a red pen, words like authentic and soulful, as if they were currency. Across from her, David rubbed his temples, muttering about overdue bills. Melissa placed the paper flat before him. "Do you see this?" she asked. "Your mother has become something. People respect her now, and where respect flows, money follows." David shook his head, weary. "She's just baking, Melissa. That's all." Melissa leaned closer, her voice low and urgent. "Number not just baking. She is building value, and if she builds it alone, what happens to us? We sink. If we bring her under our wing, if we control it, then maybe we survive." The words were not pure malice. They were born of fear, of bills stacked too high, of the desperate clinging of two people who felt the water rising above their heads. But desperation often sharpens greed into something colder. I noticed small shifts in the weeks that followed. Melissa began calling more often, her tone suddenly sweet, asking how I was, offering to help with management. David stopped by, not with Ethan, but with questions about my sales, my orders, how much cash was in the drawer. I tried to answer kindly, believing they were finally proud of me. But in the pit of my stomach, unease settled like unbaked dough. At night, I replayed their words in my head. Melissa's smile lingered too long on the article pinned to my refrigerator. David's voice tightened whenever he spoke of money. My heart wanted to believe they only cared for me, but my instincts whispered otherwise. One afternoon, as I arranged loaves of banana bread on the cooling rack, I overheard Melissa in the yard, her voice sharp, cutting through the open window. "If your mother has created value, then we have to secure it. She is family, David. Family doesn't exclude family. We need control before someone else takes it from us." Her words stung, not only for what they implied, but for what they revealed. I was no longer simply a mother to them. I had become an asset, a resource to be mined, a safety net for their sinking ship. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, remembering the years when David was a boy, when I worked double shifts to pay for his school shoes. I thought of the cakes I baked on his birthdays, the ones he devoured with frosting on his cheeks. I had given everything I had, willingly, without asking for return. And now, in their fear, my son and his wife were circling me like creditors themselves. I could almost understand their panic. Debt is a cruel master. But understanding did not make their intentions less dangerous. I whispered to myself as if to gather strength, love should never be twisted into ownership. What I built with my hands is not theirs to claim. Still, I remained silent. I continued to bake, to smile, to greet customers with warmth. Outwardly, nothing had changed, but inside, I knew shadows had entered my home. The warmth of my kitchen had drawn not only friends and neighbors, but also the gaze of those who shared my blood, gaze clouded by fear, by entitlement, by hunger for survival at any cost. What they did not know was that I had weathered storms before, and while I might not shout or strike, silence itself can be a wall stronger than steel. For now, I let them circle. But deep within, I prepared myself, because I sensed a test was coming, one that would decide not just the future of my kitchen, but the future of my family bond. It was a gray Saturday morning when David and Melissa arrived unannounced. I had just pulled a tray of apple turnovers from the oven, their golden crusts glistening in the soft kitchen light. The warmth of cinnamon filled the air, but when they stepped inside, the room grew colder. Melissa carried a sleek leather folder, her heels clicking sharply against my worn linoleum floor. David followed, his expression tired yet determined. They did not sit to share coffee or ask about my health. Instead, Melissa laid the folder squarely on my table, pushing aside the plate of fresh turnovers as if sweetness had no place in the conversation. "Nora," she began, her voice smooth, rehearsed. "We've been thinking. You've built something impressive. People are talking about Grandma Nora's kitchen, but you can't run this alone forever. You need structure. You need family." Her fingers tapped the folder. "That's why we've drafted a proposal, a franchise agreement. With our help, we can turn this into something nationwide. Your name will shine and the family will finally have the stability it deserves." I looked at David, hoping for a trace of the boy I once knew, the boy who used to lick frosting from the beaters and laugh until his cheeks hurt. But his eyes darted away, unable to meet mine. He simply said, "Mom, this is what's best for everyone." I opened the folder. Inside lay crisp pages filled with legal terms I barely understood. Yet one line stood out like a scar: position, baking consultant. My role reduced to a function, not owner, not founder, not even partner, just hands in the kitchen, laboring quietly while others signed checks and claimed vision. I traced the letters with my fingertip, the ink cold beneath my skin. My heart thudded as a thought echoed inside. Once again, my work is meant to save others. Once again, my sacrifice is invisible. Melissa leaned forward, her perfume sharp, her words sharper. "You'll still get credit, of course. You'll be the face, the sweet grandmother story everyone loves. But we'll handle the finances, the logistics. You just focus on what you're good at, baking." The word stung. Just baking. As though the years of survival, of raising David alone after his father died, of stretching every dollar with flour and sugar, meant nothing more than a pair of hands kneading dough. I closed the folder slowly. Silence stretched. I let it breathe between us, heavy, undeniable. My mind churned with conflicting tides, the instinct to protect my son from drowning in debt, the ache of knowing my labor was being framed as a lifeline for them, not as a legacy of my own. David finally spoke, his voice cracking. "Mom, we're drowning. This deal, it could save us. Don't you see? If you sign, we can all rise together. Please." His words pierced me, not because of what he said, but because of what they revealed. The desperation in his bones, the fear of failure clawing at his pride. He was my child, my flesh, and part of me wanted to throw myself into the fire again to shield him. But another part of me whispered, steady and clear, if I give away my dignity now, what lesson do I teach? That a mother's worth is always negotiable? That love means erasing yourself so others may thrive? I looked down at my hands wrinkled, flour-stained, marked by years of sacrifice. They trembled slightly as I folded them together on the table. David, I said, softly, do you remember when you were 8 and I made you that chocolate cloud cake? Do you remember how you said it was magic, that it made you believe birthdays could be brighter even after your father passed? He blinked, his face paling. Yes, I remember. That cake wasn't just sugar and cocoa, it was hope. And hope cannot be franchised, cannot be reduced to a contract where your mother signs away her soul. What I built here, I built with grief, with love, with faith that tomorrow would come. And I will not let it be turned into chains, even if those chains are held by my own son. Melissa's jaw tightened. So you're willing to let us sink? To watch your family lose everything while you play noble? I met her gaze, my voice calm but unyielding. I am willing to let you fight your own battles, because love is not control, and family is not ownership. The silence that followed was sharp, almost deafening. David's eyes brimmed with tears he refused to let fall. Melissa snapped the folder shut, her heels clicking again as she rose. This is a mistake, she hissed. One you'll regret. They left the turnovers untouched on the table. The door shut and I stood alone, my chest heavy yet strangely lighter. For the first time, I had drawn a boundary not with anger, but with quiet resolve. I whispered into the empty kitchen to myself as much as to the ghosts of the past. I will not sign away my worth, not again. It was still morning when the quiet returned to my kitchen. Cinnamon and apples perfumed the air. The folder was gone, but the question remained, hard as a stone in my chest. Would I bend again? Would I trade my name for their rescue, the way I had traded sleep and years before they even knew what it cost? I did not sleep that night. I brewed tea. I wrote in my notebook. I lined up orders for the week so the morning would not collapse into doubt. Just before dawn, Melissa texted to say a notary could meet us at noon. I replied with 4 words, come to my kitchen. If there was to be an answer, it would be given on my ground. They arrived exactly at 12, punctual like fear. Melissa wore a blazer the color of money and set a new folder on the table. David carried a pen, as if shine could make consent. I laid out a plate and 2 napkins. I did not set out forks. The window was open, the spring air moved the curtain. My recipe notebook rested beside the salt jar, the page marked with a ribbon that read, Chocolate Cloud for David, 8 years old. Mom, David began, softer than yesterday, we can keep you out of the hard parts. We will handle everything. Melissa slid the contract toward me. Her nails tapped once, twice. All you need to do is sign, she said. You get a stipend. We take the risk. Risk. The word tasted like metal. I remembered the months of double shifts. The winter, David's feet outgrew his shoes, and I cut cardboard to fit inside. No one took the risk then. I did. The memory steadied my hands. I picked up the pen. Its weight surprised me. I positioned it over the signature line and watched the tiny pool of ink gather at the tip. My reflection in the stainless kettle looked older than I felt. A breath moved through me. It was not bravado, not anger, simply gravity returning to its place. I set the pen down. The click against the table sounded like a bell. Melissa drew a breath to speak, but I lifted my palm gently, the way I used to quiet a classroom. I rose from the chair. My voice was quiet, even, anchored. I have been the foundation of this family, but this time I keep the foundation for myself. No argument followed. I did not list the nights I had stayed up or the bills I had paid. I did not catalog injuries or beg understanding. I slid the folder back to Melissa with 2 fingers. Then I closed my notebook and tied the ribbon. I wiped the table. I walked to the window and latched it. The room held its breath. Power did not feel like thunder. It moved quiet and deep within me. It felt like choosing where to place my silence. David's eyes went glassy. Boyhood flickered across his face and vanished. "Mom," he said, a single word leaning toward apology. I let it fall between us. Melissa's mouth tightened. Her voice was steel. "You are making a mistake," she said. "When the bills come due, remember this moment." I nodded once, courteous as a host ending a visit. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I need to deliver an order." I lifted a bakery box from the counter. The lid fit snug, the twine tied in a square knot. I walked to the back door. Sun pooled on the steps. Somewhere a child laughed. I stepped into the light. Behind me, chairs scraped. The front door opened, then closed. The house settled. Only the ticking clock and the faint hiss of cooling metal remained. On the porch, I paused to breathe. The air smelled like cut grass and warm sugar. I remembered my husband's hands building our first bookshelf. He used to say a foundation is meant to bear weight, not to disappear. For years I had mistaken disappearing for love. Today I learned the difference. I carried the box down the steps and onto the sidewalk, each footfall a small vow. I would not weaponize my love. I would not sign it away. My kitchen would stay mine. Small, honest, paid for one cake at a time. If rescue was needed, it would not be purchased with my name. At the corner, I turned back. The lace curtain stirred. I felt the fear loosen, thread by thread. Then I kept walking, steady as a metronome, toward a door that would open without anyone else's permission. The first week after the contract was refused, the world felt both lighter and lonelier. My kitchen hummed as usual, mixers spinning, ovens sighing, but inside me there was a stillness, the silence that comes after a storm. Customers kept coming, drawn by the whispers of word of mouth, by the scent that curled into the street. Yet my heart waited for something I could not name until one Saturday morning, the bell above the door rang in a particular rhythm that made me turn at once. It was Ethan. His hair was rumpled, his cheeks flushed from the spring wind. In his hands, he clutched the worn recipe notebook, the ribbon marking a page that had been opened and closed too many times. He placed it carefully on the counter as if setting down treasure. "Grandma," he said, his voice carrying both shy respect and secret joy. "Can we bake today, just us?" I nodded. We tied aprons, his small one printed with flour-dusted bears, mine frayed at the edges from decades of washing. He opened the notebook to the page he had memorized. His finger traced the faded ink. "Look, it says, flour, eggs, butter." He paused, grinning at the word that seemed out of place. "Love. Grandma, you really wrote that down?" I felt a smile bloom, warm as sunlight. "Yes, Ethan, I wrote it when your father was just your age, because without love, the cake collapses. It is the one ingredient you cannot leave out." He read it again, slower this time, as though carving it into his heart. "Flour, eggs, butter, love." His voice carried the rhythm of a promise, thematic echo. The words had waited decades to be spoken aloud by someone who would carry them forward. We began measuring, his small hands trembling as he cracked eggs. Shells broke uneven, but his laugh filled the room. "Don't worry," I said, "imperfection is flavor too." He sifted flour, dust rising like snowfall, landing on his nose. I wiped it gently, remembering when David once stood in the same spot, eyes wide, eager to learn. For a moment, past and present overlapped, and the pain of rejection softened into continuity. As the batter came together, Ethan stirred with surprising care. "Grandma," he asked, "can I write my own recipe one day? Can I put my own secret word?" His eyes glowed with the spark of a future not yet written. "You must," I answered. "Every baker leaves a fingerprint. Every generation writes its own flavor. That is how love travels." The oven door closed with a muffled thud. Heat wrapped the kitchen like an embrace. While we waited, Ethan leaned against me, flipping through pages of the notebook. He read names scrawled beside cakes. David's 8th birthday, my husband's retirement, the church fair. Grandma, these are like stories, he said. It's like the book of our family. I swallowed gently, the knot in my throat loosening. Yes, Ethan, stories you can eat, stories that keep us alive when the world forgets. The timer rang. We pulled the cake out, golden, fragrant, delicate. Ethan cut a corner before it cooled, laughing when steam kissed his fingers. He blew, then tasted. His eyes widened. He closed them, savoring. This, he whispered, is better than any other cake, because of the love. The words pierced me with quiet power. The rejection at Melissa's door, the silent insult of that birthday. It all faded beneath the truth of this small boy's affirmation. Generational trauma had tried to erase me, but here, beside this child, healing had taken root. He had not just eaten the cake, he had tasted the lesson. He licked frosting from his thumb and looked at me with sudden seriousness. Grandma, when I grow up, I'll keep your book. I'll bake your cakes. I'll always write love in the recipe. I promise. I touched his hair, the softness reminding me of David's long ago curls. My voice trembled, but it held steady. Then I will never be alone, and neither will you. We wrapped the cake, tied the twine, and delivered slices to the neighbors. Ethan carried the boxes proudly, repeating the list under his breath like scripture. Flour, eggs, butter, love. Each repetition was not only an echo, but an oath. That evening, after he left, I sat by the window with tea. The streets quieted, the bakery lights dimmed. I opened the notebook one more time, writing with deliberate hand beneath the old line, Ethan's promise, love will continue. For the first time in years, I did not feel like the last page of a story. I felt like the prologue to one yet to be written. My kitchen, my notebook, my grandson's vow, all threads weaving forward. The world had tried to tell me my cake was not real, that my life was excess, that my love was outdated. But Ethan, with one simple phrase, had restored truth. Flour, eggs, butter, love. In that sequence lived not only a recipe, but a lineage. And with it, I knew. The foundation I chose to keep for myself had already begun to shelter another. That night, I slept deeply. For once, not with the weariness of survival, but with the peace of continuation. The days that followed felt like standing at the edge of a new season. I had lived long enough to see winters of grief, springs of small beginnings, and summers of love that sometimes withered into fall. Yet this was different. This felt like rebirth. My bakery, once just a dream scribbled into a weathered notebook, was slowly taking shape with the help of two people who had seen me for who I was when my own family could not. Thomas Green arrived each morning with a stack of papers under his arm, his glasses slipping down his nose, muttering about headlines and food critics who owed him favors. "We are not just opening a bakery," he told me with a smile. "We are opening a story, and people are hungry for something real." His words carried conviction, but more than that, they carried faith in me. I had not been believed in like that for decades. Rachel came with her little girl strapped to her hip, carrying jars of flowers and rolls of fabric. "Every bakery should feel like home," she insisted, setting daisies into old milk bottles. "People will walk in for your cakes, but they'll stay because they feel your heart in the room." She painted walls with soft cream colors, hung curtains that shifted in the breeze and coaxed me into choosing golden lamps that spilled warm light across the wooden counters. Together, the three of us worked as if weaving threads of different cloth. I handled the ovens, my hands steadying trays of chocolate clouds, lemon loaves, and apple pies. Rachel arranged the front, balancing simplicity with warmth. Thomas scribbled notes for an article he promised to publish, his pen racing faster than his words. One evening, after the sun slipped behind the rooftops, I lit the lamps Rachel had chosen. Their golden glow wrapped the bakery in a hush of peace. The scent of fresh bread and cinnamon lingered in the air, mixing with the faint sweetness of buttercream. Standing there, apron dusted with flour, I felt like I was standing inside my own heart, rebuilt and pulsing with life. Thomas leaned against the counter, tasting a slice of sponge cake. "You know, Nora," he said between bites, "this isn't just about cakes. It's about people remembering that honesty can still taste sweet. America is starving for something like this, and you're feeding them truth." Rachel nodded, holding her daughter close. "When I eat your cake, Nora, I feel safe. My little girl will grow up remembering this place. Do you see what you've created?" I looked around. Wooden shelves stacked with jars of jam, ribbons tied around cookie bags, and in the center, a counter holding the first completed order, a chocolate cloud cake for the church fundraiser. The air hummed with quiet promise. For years, I had been told I was too old, too unnecessary, too much of a burden. Yet here, in the golden light, I saw proof that my best years had not been stolen. They had only been waiting. I thought of David and Melissa, of their contract left unsigned on my table. For a fleeting second, pain tightened my chest. But then I remembered Ethan's vow, the way his young voice had carried my words into the future. Flour, eggs, butter, love. He had promised, and in that promise the wound began to close. The bakery was not a monument to rejection, but a testament to survival. It was a quiet rebellion against being silenced. It was a sanctuary where every slice carried not only flavor, but memory. The night before opening, we sat together at one of the small round tables, sipping tea while the lamps glowed softly. Rachel's daughter slept in her arms. Thomas tapped his pen against the notebook, humming with anticipation. I folded my hands and whispered a prayer of gratitude, not just for the bakery, but for the unlikely family that had formed around me. "You know," I said quietly, "this bakery isn't mine alone. It belongs to everyone who has ever been told their love wasn't enough. Every loaf, every cake, every cookie, each one says otherwise." Rachel reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Then let's make sure they hear it." And for the first time in so many years, I felt that I was not merely surviving the world. I was shaping it, one recipe at a time, one flicker of golden light, one act of love baked into bread. When I turned out the lamps that night, the scent of fresh cake still lingered. The bakery waited in the dark, but it no longer felt empty. It felt alive, ready to welcome the world at dawn. The bakery smelled of sugar and hope that morning. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching flecks of flour still floating in the air from the early hours of kneading. I had just finished frosting the last chocolate cloud cake when my phone buzzed on the counter. I wiped my hands on my apron and glanced at the screen. It was a message from Melissa. For a long second, I simply stared. The memory of her voice at the door, sharp and dismissive, "We already ordered a real one," still echoed in me like an old bruise. I wondered if opening that message would press the bruise deeper or if, somehow, it might begin to heal. I tapped the screen. Her words appeared, halting and unlike her usual certainty. "I'm sorry, Nora. I misspoke about the cake. It wasn't fair. If you're really opening, let me help. I can carry trays or serve coffee. No need to put my name anywhere. I just want to be there." I read it twice, 3 times. My chest tightened. Regret rarely comes dressed in humility, but hers was at least a small step toward it. I felt the sting of bitterness rise, then soften into something quieter, something closer to release. I set the phone down beside the mixing bowl. My first instinct was silence, but then I thought of Ethan, his little hands tracing the recipe in my notebook, his eyes shining with trust. If I answered with anger, what would I be teaching him? So I typed slowly, letting each word weigh itself in my heart before I pressed send. "Melissa, I hear your apology. I won't turn you away, but I don't need you to serve. Come as a guest. Sit, eat a slice of cake, and let time do the talking. That will be enough." I placed the phone face down and exhaled. That message was not a surrender, nor was it vengeance. It was a boundary, a quiet, steady line between past hurt and present dignity. The rest of the morning, I lost myself in the rhythm of baking. Bowls clattered softly, whisks hummed against metal, and the oven ticked as it heated. Rachel arrived with fresh flowers, arranging them into jars by the windows. Thomas hurried in with a folded newspaper tucked under his arm, declaring, "Your story is out today, Nora. People will read it before breakfast." His excitement lit up the room. I nodded, but my mind still held the image of Melissa reading my reply. Would she understand the invitation for what it was? Not a door wide open, but a seat offered at the table, if she chose to sit without demanding control? By midday, the bakery glowed. Golden lamps spilled warmth onto polished counters. Cakes lined the shelves, each labeled in careful script: lemon drizzle, apple cinnamon, chocolate cloud. The bell above the door jingled as our first. Customers trickled in. Neighbors, friends, a teacher from down the street. Their laughter filled the room like music. Amid the bustle, I caught myself glancing at the door. Part of me wondered if Melissa would appear. Part of me hoped she would. And another part, the part I had learned to trust, knew I could go on whether she came or not. An hour into the opening, as Rachel poured coffee and Thomas explained the story behind our name, the bell chimed again. There she was, Melissa, hair pulled back, eyes searching. She held no trays, no paperwork, just her purse and a hesitant smile. I felt the room still slightly, as if everyone sensed the weight of her arrival. She walked toward the counter, paused, and said quietly, "One slice of chocolate cloud, please." I cut the slice myself, setting it on a plate. I slid it toward her, our eyes meeting only briefly. She took it, murmured a soft thank you, and found a seat near the back. I did not rush to her table. I did not ask for more words. Instead, I returned to my oven, to the steady work of love and flour. Yet in that moment, I felt something loosen inside me. It was not reconciliation, not yet, but it was not war either. The bakery hummed on. Ethan darted in after school, running straight to me with flour-dusted excitement. Rachel laughed with customers. Thomas sketched ideas for our next headline. And at the back table, Melissa ate quietly, perhaps tasting not just sugar and chocolate, but the patience she had nearly broken and the resilience she could never erase. When the lamps glowed again that evening, I locked the front door and looked around the bakery. For the first time in years, my life no longer revolved around trying to earn a place in my family's eyes. I had built a place where people could simply come and be fed, with food, with warmth, with truth. Melissa's slice of cake was gone, her chair empty. But I knew my message had been delivered, more clearly than any words. The bakery was not built to prove myself to her. It was built because I had finally chosen myself. That night, as I washed the last dish, I whispered a line that had carried me through both storms and stillness. Love does not always mean returning. Sometimes it means letting go and trusting time to finish what we cannot. The morning of our official opening felt like no other morning in my life. I woke before dawn, tying my apron with steady hands that trembled not from weakness, but from the weight of what this day meant. Grandma Nora's kitchen was no longer an idea whispered over late-night cups of tea or scribbled in margins of old recipe cards. It stood brick and mortar, windows polished to a shine, shelves lined with cakes that carried my story in every layer. By 8 o'clock, the first customers began to gather outside. I peeked through the curtain and saw familiar faces. Neighbors who had once offered a kind word when I carried groceries alone, teachers who had praised Ethan's smile, even the pastor's wife holding a basket of flowers. They were all smiling, waiting, their breath misting in the morning air. When Thomas unlocked the door, laughter spilled in with them. Rachel hurried to greet people, placing small bouquets on tables, her little girl tugging at her skirt with delight. I stood behind the counter, my heart pounding as the bell above the door jingled again and again. Feet shuffled on the tiled floor, voices rose in conversation, and for the first time in many years, the sound of belonging filled my ears. The oven gave a sharp ting, that bright metallic chime that had become my companion. I slipped on my mitts and pulled out a tray of golden pastries, steam rising in ribbons. The crowd leaned forward, murmuring in anticipation. I set them on the counter, cut one open, and the scent of butter and cinnamon spread through the room like a hymn. Someone whispered, "Smells like home," and the words rooted deep in me. I looked at my hands, dusted with flour, lines carved by age, yet steady with purpose. For so long I had thought these hands only belonged in the shadows of someone else's celebration. Today, they built the celebration. Today they offered joy instead of waiting to be asked. Rachel's laughter rang across the room as she poured coffee, and Thomas bustled near the register, already explaining to a reporter about our vision. But I stood still for a moment, listening. Every clink of cup, every note of conversation, every bite taken. It was all proof that the years of silence had not been wasted. They had prepared me for this sound, the sound of a life resurrected. Melissa had not come that morning. I noticed her absence, but it no longer hurt the way it once had. Instead, I focused on Ethan, who tugged my sleeve and asked, "Grandma, can I take one of the cookies to my teacher?" His eyes held the same sparkle that once belonged to David at his age. I nodded, handing him a small bag. Watching him skip toward the door, I realized that the future was not built in apologies or regrets. It was built in gestures of love repeated again and again like a recipe perfected over time. As the hours passed, more people poured in. Some I had never met. They had read Thomas's article or heard whispers from friends. "We wanted to see the place where the cakes are said to have a soul," one man told me with a grin. I blushed, not used to praise, but I thanked him. My cakes did not have magic. They had memory. They had the strength of a woman who had chosen to keep loving, even when love was dismissed at the door. Late in the afternoon, as sunlight slanted through the windows, I leaned back against the counter. My body ached with the long hours, but my spirit was light. I glanced at the splotched old recipe book propped on a shelf, its pages curling, ink faded. It was more than a book. It was the echo of my journey, the reminder that every line written in butter and sugar had carried me here. The oven tinged again, and I smiled. That sound, once echoing in a quiet kitchen where I stood alone, now chimed in a room alive with voices, laughter, and clinking glasses. It was not just a bell anymore. It was a heartbeat, steady and true. I lifted my head, straightened my shoulders, and let the scene wash over me. A bakery filled with neighbors, the scent of fresh bread in the air, the warmth of community woven into every corner. I was not forgotten. I was not invisible. I was here, alive, offering what I had always carried quietly inside me. Love, measured in cups of flour, delivered in slices of cake. That evening, when the last customer waved goodbye and the bell chimed one final time, I turned off the lights and stood in the golden afterglow. Grandma Nora's kitchen had opened its doors, but more importantly, I had opened mine, wide enough for life to step in again. That night, when the shop finally fell silent, I sat at the worn wooden table in the back room with only the hum of the refrigerator for company. The last light of the street lamp slipped through the blinds, painting pale stripes across my recipe book. My hands, tired but steady, opened to the page that had started it all. The old ink read, "Chocolate Cloud," for David, 8 years old. The corners were smudged from flour, the handwriting faded from years of touch. I picked up my pen, and for the first time in a long while, I added a new line beneath it. Chocolate Cloud, Ethan's version. Add 1 tablespoon of courage. The words lingered on the page, glowing almost, as if the paper itself recognized the weight of that addition. Courage was what had carried me from the doorstep where a door slammed in my face to this kitchen where bells now chimed with welcome. Courage was what let me refuse a contract meant to strip me of my worth. Courage was what guided my hand tonight steady and sure, as I claimed this chapter not only for my grandson but for myself. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. My thoughts wandered to the first time I baked that cake, when David was a little boy and we had nothing but grief after his father passed. That sweetness had carried us through nights when silence was too heavy and money was too scarce. Now, so many years later, the same recipe had become a bridge to Ethan, and beyond him, to everyone who tasted a slice and said it felt like home. For decades, I thought my identity was bound only to roles: wife, mother, grandmother, each role precious, yet each one came with expectations, with sacrifices that swallowed my name. But tonight, as the scent of cooling pastries drifted through my little shop, I understood something deeper. I am not only the sum of what I give to others, I am not only the arms that hold, or the hands that bake, or the heart that bends. I am a woman who lived, who loved, who endured, and who rose. I whispered it to myself, softly at first, then with strength. I am Nora. The name felt unfamiliar, as though I were meeting myself for the first time. Not just Grandma Nora, not just Mom, simply Nora, whole, imperfect, resilient, alive. In the quiet, I imagined Melissa's message again, her words of apology lingering in my pocket. There was a time I would have clung to them, dissected them, begged for more. But not tonight. Tonight, forgiveness did not need to be loud, nor did it need to be immediate. Boundaries, too, could coexist with love. That was the lesson age had finally gifted me. The wisdom to choose presence without surrender, compassion without erasure. On the counter lay Ethan's scribbled drawing, a lopsided cake with the words, "Grandma's is the best." I traced it with my finger and tears welled. Not tears of sorrow, but of gratitude. The boy saw me, and that was enough. The next generation would remember not the slammed door, not the harsh dismissal, but the courage stirred into a bowl and baked until golden. I rose, closed the recipe book, and placed it carefully in the tin box that had held my memories for so long. It no longer felt like a coffin for forgotten dreams. It felt like a treasure chest, ready to pass forward when Ethan was old enough to carry it. Stepping into the front room, I looked at the little bakery bathed in warm lamplight. The chairs were empty now, crumbs still scattered on the plates, the air still thick with vanilla and cinnamon. It was mine, not in ownership alone, but in spirit. This space told my story, and in every loaf, every tart, every frosted cake, people would taste more than sugar. They would taste survival, dignity, hope. I turned off the lights one by one until only the glow above the counter remained. My reflection appeared faintly in the glass door, older, lined with years, yet steady-eyed. For the first time, I did not see absence in those eyes. I saw fullness. Walking out, I locked the door gently and pressed my hand to the wood, just as I had once done at David's house when the door shut me out. Only this time I did not withdraw in shame. I let my palm rest there with pride. This door opened to me, because I had opened it for myself. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt the universe exhale with me. The street was quiet, the stars scattered across the sky. I carried no bitterness, only the quiet certainty that my story had found its rhythm again. Tomorrow, there would be more baking, more laughter, more living. And if anyone ever asked me who I was, I would not hesitate, nor would I hide behind a role. I would smile, flowers still dusting my fingertips, and say with all the courage I had added to that recipe, I am Nora Whitfield, My name is Nora Whitfield, and if you have walked with me this far, you already know the story of my cake, my family, my silence, and my rediscovery of who I am. Today, as I sit here in my small bakery, the sign outside glowing softly with the words, Grandma Nora's Kitchen, I find myself holding a cup of tea, watching the window fog slightly with the warmth from inside. Beyond the glass, I see Ethan, my sweet grandson, sharing slices of chocolate cake with his friends. Their laughter rises in the air like music, filling the shop with a rhythm that is far brighter than anything I could have imagined on that dark birthday afternoon when Melissa shut the door in my face. I remember that moment so clearly, my hands clutching the box, my heart hollowing out as her words echoed. We already ordered a real one. At that time, I thought I might never recover, never find a place for my love to land. But here I am, months later, surrounded by the scent of fresh bread and sugar, by the clinking of teacups, and the sound of Ethan's laughter. I did not lose my place. I created one. And in creating it, I found myself. Now I want to turn to you, the one listening to my voice. Tell me honestly, do you think I was too harsh that day? When I stood on that porch, should I have knocked again, pleaded for entry, begged to be let into a celebration I had already been excluded from? Or was my silence stronger than any words I could have said? I often wonder if my choice seemed cold from the outside, but I know deep in my heart, it was the moment I stopped diminishing myself for others. It was the moment I drew the line and decided I would not be erased. And maybe, just maybe, you have stood in front of a closed door yourself. Maybe you too have held something precious in your hands only to be told it wasn't enough. If you have, then you know that silence can sometimes be the loudest answer of all. That is why I want you to tell me, what would you have done? Would you have knocked again? Or would you have turned away like I did? Share your thoughts because this story is not only mine. It could be yours or anyone's who has ever been pushed aside and had to choose dignity over approval. Before we say goodbye, I would love to know something else as well. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee by your side as the sun spills across your table? Or is it late at night when stories like this one keep you company as you reflect on your own life? Let me know in the comments. We read every single one, and each word is received with gratitude. And if my journey has touched you, if you felt even a thread of recognition in my silence or my courage, I ask you to consider subscribing to this channel. Not just so you can hear more stories like mine, but so you can be part of a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, in second chances. A community that understands pain but chooses not to let pain be the final word. I thank you for spending your time with me today. Time is the most precious gift we ever give, and I do not take lightly that you chose to give yours to listen to my voice. Wherever you are, in your kitchen, in your car, in your living room late at night, I hope you carry this story with you. Carry it as a reminder that sometimes the miracle you long for will not come by knocking on your door loudly. Sometimes it waits quietly in the corner of your life, waiting for you to open your heart and make space for it. So as I set my teacup down and turn my eyes once more toward Ethan and his friends, their joy rising like a song, I whisper to myself the truth I have finally accepted. I am not only a mother, not only a grandmother, not only someone defined by what I can give to others. I am Nora, a woman who found her voice in silence, who built her worth in flour and sugar, who turned rejection into rebirth. Take care, dear listener, and may your own closed doors lead you to windows you never knew were waiting to open. Until the next story, may you live with courage, with kindness, and with the faith that healing is always possible.